comment mentioning Cyprus and Hungary.
Yeah.
Very right one.
Yeah. We're going to talk about that a little bit today. I mean, we're going to, do a little victory dance, but it's important that we
Let's mobilize for further attacks. In a good sense.
Also, I'm going to be sending you shortly a draft of a letter about the Swiss situation I just got.
Good.
Yes.
Very good. Looking forward.
Good. Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, so I think we will start in 1 minute. After my introduction, I will maybe ask you, Bill, to explain the context, how it happened, and also maybe the follow-up, because you've been following all those national decisions, and then maybe we move to European Parliament, and then Emanuelis.
Yes. Bill, hello, Bill.
Pas kažką.
Perfect.
Okay.
Hi there.
So you have,
Kad jisai mute padarytų, ne?
Bill, you have 3 musketeers on your side.
Okay. Tai vėluoja garsas. Tai ką dabar padaryti?
So we have a bit of a problem here with the...
Something is wrong. Sound is wrong.
Yeah, maybe, Bill, you can switch off the sound from Teams, because we have a reflection of that sound. Yeah, maybe, Bill, you can switch off the sound from Teams, because we have a reflection of that sound. Okay, we are now switching off your sound, just not to get that reflection, and then we will switch it on when you will start speaking. Okay, I'm starting in Lithuanian because we have translation. Gerai, tai gerbėmieji.
Ladies and gentlemen, this is the first press conference held by the Committee on Foreign Affairs. We are starting this press conference, and we are very happy to announce that after a long work, after 8 years, when the first Magnickio Act was adopted in the USA, which was later on followed by similar Magnickio's acts in Lithuania and other member states of the EU, I remember in 2015, Gabrielius Landsbergis, the then member of the European Parliament, raised this idea at the European Parliament and to adopt something similar that was adopted by the United States of America. In 2017, when we marked a very sad anniversary of the death of Magnickio's death, Lithuania, the Lithuanian Parliament, adopted its own Magnickio Act. Other Baltic countries did the same. Those countries were followed by Canada and the United Kingdom. Later on, we will be able to speak to Mr. Petras Auštrevičius, who is a Lithuanian member of the European Parliament. So the process has started going on within the European Union, and the process ended yesterday. So the European so-called Magnickio Act was adopted as the Council regulation concerning restrictive measures against serious human rights violations and abuses was adopted yesterday on the eve of the International Human Rights Day. Today, we're going to speak about the implementation of this idea. If you allow me, I'd like to give the floor to Mr. Bill Brown, who consistently worked actively in many European capitals as well as other capitals worldwide. I'd like to give the floor to Mr. Bill, who is now watching us from London, and to tell how you, Mr. Bill, assess this legal act of the European Union, and how do you see further steps that are to be taken in the future? You know that some other countries, such as Japan and others, are also deliberating on adopting similar acts. So if I may, I ask you, Mr. Bill, to take the floor. Thank you.
Bill, would you please put your mic on? Thank you, Bill. We don't hear you. Teams, in the Teams. Yeah.
Okay. Can you hear
Okay,
me?
now we hear. Yes, thank you, Bill.
Okay, good. Good morning to you, Chairman Žygimantas, thank you for holding this hearing. Emanuelis Zingaris, my friend, thank you for everything you've done. Petros Astachevicius, my partner in the European Parliament, thank you for all that you've done. Gabrielis Landesbergis, I don't know if he's here, but thank you for all of you that you've done. This has been a long, hard journey. Sergei Magnickio was murdered on November 16th, 2009, 11 years ago. And after his murder, it's become my life's work to make sure that the people who killed him face justice. He was murdered for uncovering a massive Russian government corruption scheme, and the Putin regime did everything they could to cover up his murder and to protect the people who killed him. And that's what has spawned the Magnickio Act. When I was looking for justice, I said, if we can't get justice inside of Russia, how do we get justice outside of Russia? And the one obvious thing that came to me, and it seems so obvious in retrospect now to everybody, is that the people who killed Sergei Magnickio and the people who do these types of crimes, they like to commit these crimes in their home countries, and they like to keep their money safe in the West, where there's a rule of law and property rights. And that's when we came up with the idea of taking their visas away and freezing their assets. And not going after the whole country, but going after just the individuals who did these crimes. And I originally took this idea to Washington, and I took this to the late John McCain, a Republican from Arizona, and Senator Benjamin Cardin, a Democrat from Maryland. And in a world where Democrats and Republicans can't agree on anything, this is one thing that they could agree on wholeheartedly, which is that the people who killed Sergei Magnickio and the people who do these types of things shouldn't be allowed to come to America and should have their assets frozen. That became the original Magnickio Act. It passed the Senate 92-4 in November of 2012. It passed the House of Representatives with 89%, and it became a federal law on December 14th, 2012. Vladimir Putin went out of his mind. He banned the adoption of Russian orphans by American families in retaliation, and he made it his single largest foreign policy priority to stop the Magnickio Act from spreading and repealing it in the United States. Now, these two senators said to themselves, well, if Vladimir Putin is having this terrible response, then this must be a good idea. And we shouldn't just limit it to Vladimir Putin. We should also go after other dictators and other kleptocrats in other places. And that's when they introduced the Global Magnickio Act. The Global Magnickio Act passed in 2016. And I'm very proud to say that when I began this process, not just in the United States, but I began 10 years ago in Lithuania as well. I met Emanuelis Zingaris in Vilnius, and he took up the cause. And then through him, I met in the European Parliament, Gabrielis Landesbergis. I met Petros Astachevicius, and then I met Mr. Žygimantas, and with the effort of these four individuals and many others in Lithuania, you marked the 8th anniversary of Sergei Magnickio's death on November 16th, 2017, with a unanimous decision of the Lithuanian Parliament for a Lithuanian Magnitsky Act. And I'm very proud of the work that I've done with Lithuania. And I think Lithuania, even though you're a small country, you sent a very powerful message to the European Union that if you could do it, if you're not scared of Russia, then the European Union shouldn't be scared of Russia. And it sent a very powerful message to Great Britain that if you're not scared of Russia, then Britain shouldn't be scared of Russia, and to Canada and to many other countries. And so the work that you've done has been not just for your own country, but highly symbolic for the rest of the world. Now, here we are. Yesterday, the EU, after 11 years since Magnitsky's death and 10 years since the start of the campaign, the EU has passed its Magnickio Act. And this is a cause for a huge celebration. It's a monumental milestone. And we should all take great pleasure in this accomplishment. But we should also understand that after we've taken great pleasure, after we've had a moment of celebration, that we've only won half the battle. There are two main issues going forward, very critical issues going forward. One is that the Magnickio Act is really only half a Magnickio Act. The Magnickio Act in America is a piece of legislation that sanctions human rights abusers and it sanctions kleptocrats. And the Magnickio story is a perfect example of how kleptocracy and human rights abuse are intertwined. Sergei Magnitsky exposed a kleptocracy scheme, and that led to his torture and murder. The EU only sanctions human rights abusers, does not sanction kleptocrats. That needs to change. There needs to be an amendment to the EU Magnickio Act, which will sanction kleptocrats as well. Yesterday, 15 major anti-corruption organizations signed a joint letter to Josep Borrell making this exact point, and I will echo this point, and I know Petrus has also been very strong and active in this point. And then the second big issue, and it's very, very important, is that we can have a Magnickio Act, but until it's implemented, until people who killed Sergei Magnitsky and killed Jamal Khashoggi and set up concentration camps in Xinjiang and organized the genocide of the Rohingya, until those people are sanctioned, this is just a symbolic piece of legislation. And so, and the problem is that we have a unanimity requirement. So any country like Cyprus or Hungary can veto the will of the entire European Union. And I hope that that doesn't happen. It's ahead, and we should prepare ourselves, and we should push ourselves to challenge these fights. And the last thing I want to say on this subject is that it's highly unusual to me that legislation and that policy can be conducted in secret. And currently at the European Council, when they discuss sanctions lists, and when Hungary or Cyprus or Malta intervene, it's supposed to be confidential. That's unbelievable. You cannot have that. I know no parallel in any national parliamentary governmental system where that's possible. And so I urge foreign ministers to defy that and to just make it public when a country is doing this, because that just can't be allowed to happen. And then finally, let me just say that we still have other countries working on the same legislation. As Mr. Žygimantas said, we have the Japan has now a draft Magnickio Act. We have Australia, the Australian Parliament yesterday just released the results of a year-long parliamentary inquiry where they're recommending unanimously to the government the gold standard of a Magnickio Act, including corruption, etc. We're going to be beginning work in New Zealand, South Africa, Ukraine, and various other countries. We call this the global Magnickio movement. And effectively, this replaces all the dysfunctions of the United Nations, where now we can have rule of law countries working together to sanction human rights violators around the world. Again, gentlemen, thank you for the work that you've done to make this happen, and I'm delighted to be part of this team as we move forward.
Ačiū labai, Bilai, tikrai. Ir iš tikrųjų.
Thank you, Bill. Thank you very much indeed. I do remember our meeting in London when you gave me a book on the Magnickio assassination, and I read it through overnight as soon as I came back to Vilnius. This inspired me to contribute to the voting together with my colleagues, and I didn't even expect that in the Seimas we will be unanimous, because the Seimas back in 2017 had some divisions, but we were successful. And I remember the 2012 in Washington when the act was adopted in the USA, and when we all said that since that day the crimes made in Russia will have no borders, and the people who fight for human rights will be encouraged by this act. And this will also send a signal to those who are preparing for committing those crimes that they will be persecuted. Mr. Petras Auštrevičius, Bill mentioned something that we're not fully happy with. In our Committee on Foreign Affairs, or the same as we also highlight that there's no kleptocracy or corruption element in the European Magnickio Act. Our Minister of Foreign Affairs was asked to make a public announcement on that, and Mr. Linkevičius said that in Brussels yesterday. Mr. Auštrevičius, how do you see the opportunities for amending this act so that stealing by Putin, Lukashenko, and others are reacted to? Can this act be reviewed at a later stage? Thank you very much indeed for your personal input in contributing to the unit in the European Parliament, because the European Parliament was the very first institution in the European Union that supported this document. The Commission and the Council only joined at a later stage. Mr. Auštrevičius, what could you say on that? Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I'm welcoming Seimas, the first committee press conference meeting. This demonstrates how high is the standard for human rights today, and I hope that throughout the term of office, Mr. Chair and Secretary Zingeris, you will uphold these positions and will never allow this area be abused.
And, you know, I mean, all those achievements and accomplishments, what been crowned, I mean, in yesterday's Foreign Affairs Ministers' Council, it's your achievement, Bill. I think you present yourself as a great fight for human rights worldwide. I mean, having in mind innocent man, Sergei Magnickio, who'd been murdered by Russian secret services in prison a decade and more ago, and your insistence and your persistence fighting and asking the European Union to acknowledge, I mean, to get the political instrument, the legal instrument to fight against those who are really constantly violating human rights. It's the greatest achievement for the 21st century in Europe. I wish we will continue cooperating alongside asking for necessary amendments, and I'm sure, I mean, sooner or later it will come.
I have to say that indeed, in the European Parliament, we had a very strong interparliamentary and coalition-based agreement between the Conservatives and the Social Democrats and the Greens, as well as the Conservative reformists, who wanted the European Union's law on Magnitsky Act to be fully fledged and encompass corruption-related crime. The EU should be ashamed of itself because in the very first legal act it didn't mention these crimes, which account for the greatest share of the crimes made by autocratic regimes. They're stealing from their nations. By seeing this process, we have to understand that this is not fair. And we should strive for a review of this law. It is foreseen for 2023 to 2024. It will take some time, but it's important to pool the efforts of a political coalition, a group of states and politicians who would reach the result at the necessary time. Bill was right in noticing that unanimity is crucial. Indeed, it's a risk factor which we have to adequately assess. It may happen so that when we look into abuses on human rights in particular countries, some member states or their politicians will try to engage in lobbyism and avoid the application of those sanctions. Therefore, if we are to be serious, I believe that this law should be the first one to which qualified majority principle should apply when we speak about the result which we can achieve after the future EU conference. Mr. Pavilionis, I would like to express my hope that the human rights violations and the fight in reinforcing our policy should ensure that all member states take into consideration the human rights, and I hope that this remains the government's central policy and that there will be no serious objections in the Seimas and the government of Lithuania in adoption of laws that need to be adopted to amend the necessary laws. We should be the ones to, as soon as possible, support the initiative of the democratic communities from on which the newly elected U.S. president has made an announcement. We have to collaborate with the democratic community of countries. Bill was right in saying that Australia, Japan, and other countries of the democratic world want this, and this has to be expanded. We have to encourage those countries. We need more links with the politicians of those countries, and we need to communicate with the society. I hope that the United Nations, with the Human Rights Universal Declaration, are important. I believe that the Magnickio Act will be also sometime adopted in the United Nations, and this will be part of the legal regulation of all countries worldwide. This will demonstrate a strong determination worldwide to fight against these crimes, and the Universal Human Rights Declaration will sound differently. And apart from being a political and moral signal, this will also be grounded in specific instruments to respect human rights all over the world. Best regards to Mr. Browder, best regards to you, colleagues. I do believe that we will win this combat. Thank you. Thank you, Petras. Indeed, may I assure you, on behalf of the Committee on Foreign Affairs of the Seimas, where 3 signatories to the Act of Lithuanian Independence are working, freedom and democracy will indeed remain in the center of our focus. Tomorrow, The Foreign Affairs Committee will start its session with our old friend Anatoly Lebedko and Franek Wieczorka. We will speak about the Belarusians' freedom. Today, the new government program is presented in the Seimas, which is unquivering in saying that we have to become a beacon of freedom and democracy in the region. Thank you, Petras Auštrevičius, for mentioning signatories, and I will ask Mr. Zingeris to comment on the Biden's administration and its key foreign policy events. The Democracy Center. Mr. Zingeris is a long-standing contributor who heads the Parliamentary Forum of Democratic Communities. Let's not forget that the act adopted in Brussels yesterday appeals to our will. We're not talking about Belarus alone. We're not talking about Russia alone. We're talking about the entire world. Mr. Zingeris, you have been an official reporter at the European Council on Nemtsov's assassination, which has still not been investigated into. How can we contribute to that global combat, and what is your take on that? Emanuelis. First of all, may I congratulate Mr. Browder and the supporters who are also here, Ambassador Pavilionio, Mr. Auštrevičius, who have contributed to the adoption of Magnickio Act. Dear Bill, please be sure that we will only refer to it as the Magnickio Act. Yesterday, a Magnickio Act was adopted in Brussels, and this is how it will be referred to, the Magnickio Act, in memory of Sergei Magnickio. Apart from me and Mr. Pavilionio, Boris Nemtsov used to say, sit here alongside us in many press conferences. The late Boris Nemtsov. His memory, our memory of him, as a candidate leaders of the Russian state, a person who was on barricades in Ukraine, who announced in Russia no to Crimean's occupation and was assassinated later on. Several days ago, for the first time in history, his friend Dubovitskoya, who was with him when he was assassinated near the entrance to Kremlin, where Putin goes to work every day, the so-called bridge a bridge which reminds us of that assassination, this crime. Quite recently, Madame Dorotskaya said in her first interview that who is responsible for the assassination of Boris Nemtsov. And in fact, the responsible powers are the political powers of Russia. Especially, they are responsible for not investigating into this assassination. This is the opinion of the international community, and it is demonstrated in all international parliamentary investigations. I'm sorry that the Russian delegation doesn't allow reporters into the Council of Europe, and I was announced as persona non grata, as well as others who are looking into the assassinations of those people. Yesterday's Magnickio Act's adoption is just a frame, a very nice frame, a very good step forward, which we welcome, but we need to come back to another way of voting, not a unanimity voting in the European Union on those matters, on majority voting, because some states that have questionable links with totalitarian regimes may hinder the adoption of clear-cut decisions on human rights matters. This is why this nice frame, Your Excellency Ambassador Pavilionio's, Mr. Patvirtintas, we need to make this framework a mechanism that works, that has content. America now pronounces the key thesis of John McCain, which is not America first, not Lithuania first, not Germany first, but solidarity first, democracy first. We are entering a new era, and that's why in our government program, which has been presented by the Committee on Foreign Affairs included, have proposed that just like 10 years ago, with participation of Ambassador Pavilionis and Minister Audronis Žygimantas, we have created a parliamentary forum at the Parliament, a subdivision of the Community of Democracies. The restoration of the Community of Democracies is a front of democratic countries. Egoism should be left aside. Freedom, which we are celebrating for 30 years now, has to be the winner. The idea of freedom has to win. This decision initiated by Bill Browder yesterday has to be the decision of the community of nations. We have now an act that will unite the democratic world against the totalitarian regimes and for human rights in those totalitarian regimes. Thank you, everyone. We will establish the subcommittee on democracy in order to follow the cause on initiative of Mr. Emanuelis.
Thank you, Mr. Emanuelis. Well, as our press conference is coming to an end, we'll have to go to vote to the plenary chamber, but I have a question to Bill, and also journalists have a question to Bill as well. So first, I'd like to give the floor to journalists.
Browder, you've mentioned kleptocracy issue. In your opinion, why this specific element was ignored while creating an EU version of a Magnickio Act?
Bill, we don't hear you. Gal jūs galit patikslinti klausimą, ko jūs...
Okay. Hello? Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Sorry.
Sir, did you hear my question?
Thank you for the question. As I understand, the decision at the European Union to exclude corruption was the result of intervention by certain countries. And I don't have the names of those countries specifically, but I can imagine it's the same cast of characters that tried to stop the Magnickio Act in the first place. And so my guess, and I can't state this as fact, but only speculation, is that Hungary was involved in making sure that corruption wasn't included. I was on a press conference with Foreign Minister Stefan Blok from the Netherlands yesterday, and he made it very clear that it was the Dutch position, and I should say it was his proposal that led to this EU Magnickio Act being formally introduced, and he was of the view, and I believe that other sort of rule of law EU countries were of the view that corruption should be included, and so we have to assume that it was one of these cast of characters that made corruption disappear.
Thank you, Bill. And my maybe last question, if we don't have any other questions, because time is really up. We all mention, maybe inspiration or some ideas coming from Biden administration on this democracy summit. What do you expect from Biden administration? Can we expect that US will be back on democracy and human rights? And how can we really work together in order to achieve some results? You know, freedom in Belarus is dying. We do not have spectacular results related with democracy in the eastern flanks of Europe. Russia is still aggressive. So this is just our region. How shall we target our activities looking forward to inauguration of new US president with your experience, Bill?
Mr. Pavilionis, thank you. That's a really important question. And I think that we're now entering a new era, a very good new era of transatlantic cooperation. I know that President-elect Biden is somebody who understands the value of alliances, of partnerships, and of shared values. And from what I understand, the team that he's building and bringing on to do this will embrace the EU transatlantic cooperation. And I think that we can probably work to achieve a lot more in this regard. And so I think we should all be taking trips to Washington as soon as we can after January 20th in order to engage with the new administration and to work together. I believe that now that the Magnickio Act exists in the United States, in Canada, in the EU, in the UK, and soon to be Australia, there will be Magnickio conferences of governments to harmonize both how the legislation works in these countries and to harmonize the sanctions list. And so, and we shouldn't leave it to the EU to do this. We should do this as, in my case, as an activist, and in your case, as a politician, and engage both directly with the U.S. government and engage with your counterparts in U.S. Congress. I think that there's a lot of we're on fertile ground now in order to make more of these sanctions happen against some of the terrible abusers. And I should finally say that, you know, in addition to Russia and Belarus, which are neighbors, and we can see this almost on our doorstep, you know, we have this issue with China. And everybody is afraid of China because they think the economic fallout is going to be too painful. And that's the real virtue of having of doing this together, is if the EU and the US and Canada and Australia and the UK were to sanction Chinese officials together, how does China retaliate? Because if they do retaliate with their trade weapon, they're going to be cutting off their nose to spite their face.
Emanuelis, dar vieną žodį ir...
I'd like to give the floor to Mr. Emanuelis. 30 years on, after the Baltic states regained their independence, we see a heroic fight of the Belarusian nation for its freedom. In fact, Belarusian people are striving for a more dignified life. President Lukashenko is taking hostage the nation and is destroying the nation that is living just right next to our borders. We witness the cruel behavior of the Belarusian authorities against the Belarusian people. I believe that we have to include the aspirations of the Belarusian nation into the European agendas. The Belarusian regime is financed from the Kremlin, from Moscow. We are well aware of the spectrum of human rights violations. We have to help those 10 million people now, because these people are trying to restore justice. We managed to restore justice 30 years ago. Thank you. I'd like to thank to the interpreters, to the organizers of the conference, to the journalists, and to the key speakers of this conference. I thank Mr. Bill Brody on behalf of the entire Lithuanian parliament. I'd like to express my gratitude to Bill, because this shows how much one person can achieve. I believe that it is the international community that placed trust in your efforts. I'd like to thank Mr. Petras Auštrevičius for his continuous work in the field of human rights, who was one of the key leaders of Lithuania in Brussels and who has been fighting for human rights for 30 years now. We have the potential and we have the opportunity to work with our partners in Washington. We have to work with our partners in the European Union to ensure that kleptocracy and corruption are included in Magnickio Acts. We have to prevent Lukashenko and Putin from hindering the people of Belarus to achieve their aspirations. I believe that our countries have to set the example to Belarus, to other countries. I don't think that it is very sincere from our countries to support countries aspiring for democracy, but not to do anything else to help them gain freedom. I am sure that the new foreign affairs ministers and other ministers of Lithuania will have to contribute to the European attempts. We have to make sure that we will be able to convince our counterparts in the European Union, but I can assure you that we will do our utmost to achieve our common results. Thank you once again, and we'll be meeting in Washington or in Brussels. Thank you.
And have a nice day.
Yeah, it's this golden framework will be fulfilled with the contents.
Thank you, Bill. Thank you so much. See you. And waiting for you in Lithuania after pandemia is getting down. Goodbye.
Thank you, Bill, for everything. It was your day yesterday. Thank you. Your day.